we are on less than 7, so which we handed out a couple weeks ago, and I had some extras I handed out last week, but I do have 1 or 2 copies here, if anybody needs one. But I said, yeah, less than 7. You want, okay. All right, going once, going twice. Sold. All righty. We'll go ahead and get started here. We have completed all the due-off schedules, etc. So if you sign up for anything and you're on a schedule, whatever that may be, Kelly's going to have that for you, so make sure you see her. Now, things that are not schedules, you know, there's a lot of things. There's, you know, if you signed up to, I use examples as to be one who might paint. Well, we don't have a paint schedule. We have that list of names. Should we have a need for painters, then we would call upon them. But these are schedules, weekly schedules. So now we will have a master list of everything available as a PDF. Probably we'll have that available in the next couple days online. There'll be a link to it on our Facebook page as well as on the webpage at kentchristian.org. There'll be a link on there as well. You can click and get the whole kit and caboodle. So everything that we have, every list, every ministry, every schedule will be in that PDF. Okay. So as far as we went ahead and printed off the schedules and we highlighted the names, and we'll be handing see Kelly to get those. All right. So while I'm thinking about it, this month is flown by, or is flying by. And so our harvest party this year is going to be a week earlier than it usually is. So is it the 24th, October 24th, is that a Sunday? No, 23rd. Right? Because the 24th is a Monday and 31st is a Monday. So October 31st, we're going to have our second trunk or treat. And so Eric has a sign up out there for those who would to do a trunk. So we want to encourage everybody to be creative and maybe do that. Last year we had a great number of cars and individuals. Turned out to be a great event. So if you want to come take part in that, please do. I do want to inform you of one thing though. They'll be judging for best trunk, and y'all in the world hurt because we're gonna win. So
that last year.
Yeah, we almost did. So we came in second. So,
and it's on a Monday this year, not?
Yes, on a Monday, yeah. So it's, October 31st is on a Monday, so the trunk or treat's going to be on Monday, but the harvest party will be on the 23rd. And so get that on your calendars. Be prepared. At the harvest party, we are going to have another chili cook-off this year. That seemed to be one that everybody enjoyed. I did win that. And we are also going to have at the trunk or treat a pumpkin carving contest. So if you have something there, if you have that kind of town and ability, and we'll have an area set up for the pumpkins to be carved and set up there, and we'll have a contest for that as well. You might be able to pick up a pumpkin when we go to Cornucopia on Saturday the 15th. So a lot coming up. We're going to be making announcements about everything that's coming up. I think it's this. Anybody have a calendar up? I should have. What do you got? 15th. The 15th. Saturday, October 15th, we're going to be going to Cornucopia. If you guys, we've gone to Huber's a few times and thought we'd switch it up this year and go to Cornucopia, and they've got a lot of cool stuff there as well. Where you go to the you pick them for the pumpkins, so you might get a pumpkin there to carve so it's all just woven together in this great fall tapestry coming up. So I can just see the excitement on all your all's faces. So I guess we'll get into our lesson here. So we are picking up with in chapter 11 and in the Gospel of John, and we've been working our way through the early stages of a very significant event in the life of Jesus. So significant that it is recorded in how many of the Gospels? Anybody remember? 3? Four? Okay, well let's back up. What's the event that we're discussing? The resurrection of Lazarus. And so we made a very interesting point last week. And how many is it recorded in? It's recorded in one Gospel, John. Yeah, so it's a trick question. That's Danny Kelly's special right there. Yeah, so just because it's only recorded in one doesn't make it any less or more significant in the grand scheme of things. But John felt it necessary to record this event and provide it for his readers, and there's a lot of good reasons why he would have done that. A good reason why would have been that the others didn't include it. And so the others didn't include it, so he did. And so there's many reasons, so we don't look at that as a negative, we look at it as a positive. So we began to discuss this event where we learn of the situation, and Jesus hears about it. And so as he hears about it, what is his reaction? Okay, is he spring to action? Okay, no. So he waits, and so he sends that message that he's not going to come right away. And we've discussed how this might have affected Mary and Martha, and by the time that they may have gotten his message, Lazarus may have already been dead. That is quite possible. And so we really spent a good deal of time talking about the significance of this. And the question that we asked was, did Jesus heal everybody that he wanted to?
Probably not.
And so we talked about this concept a lot, is that his love and compassion, certainly he would have wanted to heal anybody and everybody, but we submitted the idea that he was not permitted to do so. And are we comfortable with that idea?
Yep.
Okay, why are we comfortable with that idea?
Because we live in a fallen world, and that is the reality of this world.
Okay.
What it can't save us from is the eternal separation and the second death.
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. What might be another reason?
Faith. The people didn't have the faith to receive the healing.
Okay, say that again for me.
The people who didn't receive healing didn't receive it because they didn't have the faith.
Okay.
That
Now, was a person's faith in the healing, was it always a contingent thing? Did a person have to believe in order to be healed?
The cripple at the pool of Bethesda was obviously putting his faith in something else previously.
But it was still by faith that he was healed. He heard the word of God, and he was healed by faith.
I want to be careful as I think about this and talk about this. This is something I really want to think about before we get too far along the lines here. No.
What?
The one that had all the demons. There was, he was with the Legion, the one that was, out of his mind, and, yeah, so there's something that we need to be careful about, because, well, we'll say this. In the evangelical world as a whole, and especially within the charismatic movement, they will say that a person can be healed, but it doesn't happen because they don't have the proper amount of faith. Is it possible that Christians pray for a non-Christian person who does not have any kind of faith, and God would intervene in that circumstance?
Yes.
So we have to be careful about that per se. It's something that would be an interesting study to launch off into for a whole study. But what might be another reason when we say that did Jesus heal everybody that he wanted to? We said no, and we're comfortable with the idea that he didn't, and we're comfortable with the idea that he was not permitted to. So the idea that I want us to focus on here is are we comfortable with the idea that Jesus was not permitted to?
Yes.
Are we comfortable? So the question is, why are we comfortable with that idea?
Because it's the will of God.
Okay, it's the will of God.
There's a purpose for healing.
Okay, there's purposes involved. The miracles that are taking place in that time had a very specific purpose. We've discussed this in great deal through the Greek word signs, wonders, and miracles, right? What else? What else makes us comfortable with this idea that Jesus was not permitted to? Okay, so this goes with what Randy was saying, is that the nature of the relationship was that of submission. And Jesus, in the incarnation, submitted himself to the will of the Father, and so we're comfortable with that.
That's what we're supposed to do.
Certainly. And so, submission in this case, when we talk about this, is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. If it exists within the nature and character of the Godhead, then it's inherently good. And so we're comfortable with this idea that his compassion called for action, but his wisdom and submission to God required waiting. And so that's an incredible thought when we really think about it. Because the more that we're able to try to understand the incarnation itself, the better we understand the relationship that Jesus entered into in that, and that was the foundation of his life and work as the Messiah. And so we've established this. So later on we're going to come into contact with the shortest verse of the Bible. Okay? Think about this sentence here. His compassion called for action, but wisdom and submission to God required waiting. Waiting would mean what? Lazarus would die. What else? Okay, well, as far as in relationship to him dying, what's that going to mean for everybody else?
You're going to experience the loss.
It's going to be a lot of mourning. There's going to be the loss of a loved one. The description here is that of Jesus. This is one whom Jesus loved. And certainly we know that he had a close relationship with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And so he knew that he had the ability to heal, but wisdom and submission required him to wait. And if waiting was going to mean that a lot of people were going to go through a lot of pain, and Lazarus was going to die, that would be hard. If you knew you had the ability to correct the situation, but you were told not to, would that be hard?
I have nightmares about that. I mean, knowing I have the ability to do something and there's a tragedy going on, and for some reason I'm restrained from helping, and that's going to be a horrible feeling. That's a horrible feeling.
Sure. And so, knowing the end result, I mean, we tend to think, well, Jesus knew that he was going to raise them and all this. At this point, it's indicated by the text and what he says, that in verse 4, the sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified in that. So I think at this point in time, he knows what he's permitted to do. It's just he has to wait. You will raise him from the dead, but it will be after he dies, and after the mourning has begun, and after they've gone through this difficult time. And so I think there's a lot of emotions bound up in this for him. I really do. So after 2 days, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea, verse 7. Now, so let's think about this. Let's go ahead and read this. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, verse 8, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again? Probably pretty good advice, right? Seems like there's some wisdom in this. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. This he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go that I may awaken him out of sleep. The disciples therefore said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now, this indicates to us something interesting here. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he was speaking of literal sleep. Now this could be a little confusing, because in that day and age, we'll talk about this here in a little bit, sleep was used as a euphemism for death. So this time, they didn't take it to be that figures. They thought he was speaking literally, and this tells us that here. And so there was some confusion because of the literal and the figurative use of this term. And so that's why we have this clarifying sentence here, is because this could have been understood one of two ways. And they understood it the opposite of what Jesus was saying. Now, Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he was speaking of literal sleep. Then Jesus therefore said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Oh. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. So let us go to him. You think that was a flippant statement? Just kind of nonchalant, but I'm glad I wasn't there. What do you think the tone of his statement there was?
We're going.
We are going. I think there was a lot of heart-wrenching in that, but I'm glad I wasn't there because of the ultimate purpose. I don't think this was a happy statement. This was a sad statement, but for the ultimate good. So now, Thomas, we know about Thomas, right? He can be a little tentative. And earlier, the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews, verse 8, we're now just seeking to stone you, and you're going there again. I'm sure he was among them that were saying that. What are you doing? But then, in verse 10, therefore, Thomas, therefore, who was called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. So now, what's he saying? Well, Jesus is going. And so he's like, we're going into battle here. This is the, we're going to be right there with you. Rabbi Jesus, we're going with you. And if they kill you, they're going to have to get through us. It's an interesting statement. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary still sat in the house. That's a little backwards, right? Why do I say backwards?
Because normally Mary was the one coming out to greet Jesus, and Martha was the one attending to things in the house.
Certainly. So we have this idea of Mary being the one who is more connected to Jesus, but Martha not so much. Jim almost gets kind of like a bad guy rap, you know, like, oh, it's just old Martha, right?
Maybe she took that constructive criticism to heart.
Could be. Well, sure. But I think we're going to see something here about this whole thing. And it's possible that there was some spiritual growth there, certainly. So, Martha therefore said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Now, when she said, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, what do you think about that? What do you think about her tone? What do you think about, how do you think that was communicated?
I think she's mournful, but I don't think she's blaming.
Do you think this is kind of an accusation of like, why weren't you here?
No, I don't think so.
Well, she knew he had the ability to do it.
Okay, so she spoke clearly of the knowing and trusting in his ability to do so. And certainly she knows of all the other things that have occurred. She knows of the things that have happened earlier with Jairus' daughter, and other things that have happened. Surely she knows of these things, being a close associate, a friend of Jesus.
Seeing me, I've probably been a little ticked because she didn't get there.
Okay, so our initial thoughts are that maybe we're like, you know, I thought we were close. Well, why did you come when we sent message? You should have come. So there's a possibility that we might have been ourselves fighting those same thoughts. But even so, in the midst of all this, she expresses great deal of trust and understanding of who Jesus is and what's happening here. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother shall rise again. Now, two ways she could understand this. What are the two ways she could understand this?
Resurrection or walking out of the tomb.
Okay? So the two ways that we could understand this is that she could have been trusting in the resurrection that was going to happen in the last days, or she could have understood it to mean that, or it could have been that he physically is going to come and walk out of this tomb. She could have understood it one of two ways there. And it indicates in verse 24 that she understood it a certain way. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Whew. Lazarus is dead. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Lazarus is dead. What do you mean? People that believe in me aren't going to die. There's only one way to understand this. And she's got a good understanding of what's happening here. Now, I believe that it's difficult to say at this point. You know, did they understand what we're able to understand through the full teachings of the New Testament about that there will be a bodily resurrection of everybody, body and spirit together as we're meant to be? I don't know if she understood that, but she definitely understands the spiritual part of it. The foundational understanding of all this is the fact that we're dual creatures, right? We have a dual nature. What is our nature? Body and spirit. If you don't have that understanding, this makes no sense. This makes sense only in that of the fact that you will never have to die. He's speaking only of in a spiritual sense. Now, is it possible that there will be people who do not die physically and who do not die spiritually. Is that possible? Is it possible that you would have someone that does not die, that will not die spiritually and will not die physically? Is that possible?
Yes, Jesus returned.
Okay, it is returned for those.
Who are,
Yeah. And it's also possible in this case. That's the only way it's possible. That's the only way it's possible is for those. Now, we will say, though, that the only exception would be that for one that had never experienced spiritual death, so at the return of Jesus, those prior to the age of accountability. And they're going to be the really blessed ones. They're never going to have any aspect of their being that would be had experienced any kind of death. That'd be good. And so this dual nature and understanding this, when he says, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die, do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. So she associates this statement with what? She associates what she's saying here, yes, I believe this, and the reason I believe it is because I understand who you are. And if she understands that she knows who he is, then she can trust in that what he says is absolutely true. If in fact he is God, then what he says is true, and so she's basing her trust and understanding in the fact that she understands that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Is that not the nature of our faith? Is that not the nature of our hope in the promises? We understand through this idea of evidential faith that we understand, we believe in the evidence that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And since we believe that, we believe that what he says and that what he promises will come true. It's the same thing. It's a little different. She got to look him in the eye. But don't miss this fact, is that she still had faith. Faith is believing in and believing that. It's no different for anybody in any point of history. When the Bible says that it's a passage in Corinthians and not we walk by faith, not by sight. That's not a statement of we believe in the lack of evidence, in spite of the evidence, or that we don't have. That's saying that the pathway that we come to believe now is in and through the evidence that has been provided for us, but not necessarily in sight, in that we can see Jesus in the way that they saw Jesus. No one can see Jesus in the way and witness his life other than the ones that saw him. That's what that verse is talking about, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. So, when Jesus said, let us go back to Judea, this was like walking into the jaws of death. Judea was where deadly enemies were waiting for him. Instantly, the disciples protested. Jesus' enigmatic reply in John 11:9 and 10 suggests that there is a favorable time for every good work. And now was the time when Jesus would make a quick trip to Bethany and get away without falling into the trap of his enemies. Thus, he could continue the work he wanted to do in his day and still postpone his death until the appointed time. Now, Jesus explained that Lazarus was asleep, that he was going to awaken him. In both Jewish and Greek circles, sleep was used in a figurative way to mean death. But the disciples in this case took it literally. If Lazarus had fallen into a natural sleep, they said, well, that was a good sign. He would get well, and there was no need for Jesus to go to Bethany. Jesus then said, removed all discussion, well, Lazarus is dead. Let us go to him. And of course, we already talked about this. Thomas, who's called Didymus, meaning twin, spoke out for the disciples with words of courage and wholehearted commitment. He expressed his willingness to go to Judea and die with Jesus. Thus, he gave one example of what Jesus talked about later. The man who hates his life in the world will keep it for eternal life. So, here we have an example then of disappointment, but there's hope. Well, little Bethany was full of sorrow when Jesus came. Even from Jerusalem, friends had come to join the mourning. Somehow, someone saw Jesus was coming, and they ran to tell Martha, and so she went out to meet Jesus before the other mourners knew he was coming. Now, Jesus did not work the miracle upon Lazarus without first challenging the living as he probed into their faith. Martha showed her disappointment by saying that Jesus could have done something if he had been there, but she showed her faith and hope by saying that he could still do something if he chose to ask God. Jesus replied, "Your brother will rise again," must have stirred hope still more, but she still was cautious, not wanting to hope for too much. Of course, Lazarus would rise in the general resurrection at the last day, but could Martha hope for something more than this? Something nearer? Dare she hope that Lazarus would rise that very day? Now this is another interesting thing. What do we have here in verse 25? What category of statements is this? Okay. This is one of the I ams, right? We said there were 7 great I am statements of the book of John. This is the one. I am the resurrection and the life. So we've had others, right? Go some out.
Good shepherd.
I'm the good shepherd.
I'm the truth, the life, the way.
Yes, we're not there yet, but that is, yes, chapter 14, verse 6.
I'm treating your friends about
That's not coming. That's down the road too.
Yes.
So he's the door, the good shepherd.
Bread.
Bread, I'm the bread. Yes, yeah, I'm the bread.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is one, yeah, 3 words. So this is one of those I am statements. Not only is he the bread of life, the light of the world, and the good shepherd, he's also the life itself. And not only is he life, but he is the resurrection and the life. He is life in spite of death. And this life is true life. Essential to true life is belief in Jesus. Even if a believer dies, this is the essence of this statement. Even if a believer dies, he will live forever in Christ. What a wonderful statement. But then he said, do you believe this? Jesus put the question directly to Martha, and it was a hard question. She could not understand all that Jesus meant. Now, did she have all the evidence that we have that Jesus is the Messiah? What had the epitome of all evidence has not happened yet, right? Because 1 Corinthians 15, what do we read there? That tells us that's the nail in the coffin, if you want to say, for an atheist. What's 1 Corinthians chapter 15 tells us is the ultimate apologetic, the ultimate piece of evidence.
Resurrection.
Yeah, it tells us that it's the resurrection. Because without the resurrection, all this is meaningless. But she didn't have that yet. But she had plenty of evidence. Just as he told the others, you have plenty of evidence. And so upon the evidence that she had, she believed that Jesus was the Christ. And so he put that question to her very bluntly. And he asked if she believed, and she did. She said, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. Did you say earlier the Great Confession? Who do we always associate the Great Confession with? Peter. Well, guess who said it just as clearly and just as powerfully? Martha. Do you reckon we give her enough credit? So that covered everything. Understood or not, whatever the Christ said was true. Such was the faith of Martha. So she didn't understand everything, but what she did understand trumped what she didn't know. So let's read on what happens now. So, and when she had said this, what we just read in verse 27, she went away and called Mary her sister, saying secretly, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she arose quickly and was coming to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha met him. The Jews then who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit, and was troubled, and said, where have you laid him? So we've talked about this already, but if you think about this for a moment, have you ever been in a highly emotional situation where you were holding it together until something snapped? And then it was just like, you ever been there? I certainly have. I think that's what happened here. Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And then Jesus wept. So this was that moment for him. And so the Jews were saying, behold, how he loved him. But some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of him who was blind have kept this man also from dying? Jesus therefore, again being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, remove the stone. No, that's a bad idea. Anybody got New King James? I think the word stinketh might be in there. He's not here to defend himself that when Dan was coming through the door, a stink bug landed on his leg. He said, that stink on stink. Alright, so I'll probably say that out here in a minute if he's listening. He might be asleep. That's happened before. Alright, so that doesn't speak well. Okay, and so but some, there's not a 15 seconds late. But some of them said, could not stand. And Jesus therefore, again being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was caved, and the stone was lying against it. Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of he said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he's been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So if he can take care of death, he might take care of smell too. Is that really important right now? The smell? The practical nature of Martha comes through here. It's very practical.
Well, the smell is from death because it's decay.
Oh, certainly. Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt.
So if he's calling things back to life, that decay's gone.
Certainly. But it was a closed up room. So, I don't know. Well, Jesus said to her, did I not say to you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And so they removed the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou heardest me. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people standing around, I said it, that they may believe that thou didst send me. So this is the ultimate reason. Jesus has already prayed through this situation. God has revealed his plan for this whole thing to him, and now it's come to this moment where Jesus says, he's speaking very clearly so that those can hear about the conversation that's already taken place between them. Right? Yep. This prayer and this conversation that's already taken place between Jesus and God the Father, he's reiterating it so that the people there will know why we've gone through all this. We've gone through all this for this moment, move the stone, and when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. He who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped Around with a cloth, Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many therefore of the Jews who had come to Mary and beheld what he had done believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. What a scene this would have been.
It's amazing how hard of heart somebody can be too.
Well, with the ones that, certainly. With the ones who went to go tell the Pharisees and the officials, certainly. We'll talk about that here in just a moment.
You buried this guy 4 days ago, and he's walking, here he is walking out to greet you. I mean,
Now, what do you think, when we talk about the nature of what this would have looked like as he came out, literally he's somehow walking completely bound, so this is, literally almost like a mummy, right? Certainly he would have been, wrapped and barely could, it was probably quite the scene for just him to get to his feet. But here he come out. Now, this wasn't exactly like Jesus at his tomb, right? What evidence do we have that it was different at the tomb of Jesus? We have the burial cloth, right? So, how do you think that happened? I never thought about this. But we talk about the cloths being there, and if we understand that it's probably very similar, that Jesus was wrapped very tightly and covered with all the spices and things, and done just the way that Lazarus was. We understand that Lazarus came out and someone had to help him, which is just kind of like, I just wonder. Now, could be a number of things, we don't have any evidence, but you reckon there was an angel in there helping him?
I don't think he was prepared like Lazarus.
Okay.
I think because Mary and all of them were taking spices and everything down there because he hadn't been prepared properly. It was done in a hurry. That's just my feeling.
So he wasn't wrapped up at all?
I think the claws was there. I don't think he was.
That's interesting.
Well, that's just my thought. It's just an opinion. Because
Sure.
it was done in such a hurry. They had to get it done before the Sabbath.
Sure.
They had to get him off. And
that's interesting.
And then so the ladies was bringing spices and things to take care of him, to take care of the body. And that's when they saw him.
Okay, well that might be. That's interesting.
If he could control the waves.
Oh, sure, yeah, it could have been instantaneous. Could have been. I'm just wondering if there was still.
He was a good man and he folded his clothes.
And put them up. You really want to go there?
No, hey.
well, we do know.
Yeah, you came in better than
I would say you're opening up. Yeah.
We do know.
Careful.
We do know that in the resurrection he walked after the resurrection he walked through walls. So I don't think coming through your burial cloth.
Oh, sure. It's just something that just think about what it would have looked like in that moment. It could have been instantaneous, maybe not. And Garrett brings up a good point here. It's just fun to think about. It matters not at all. Okay, so let's move on.
Well,
So
I think maybe there was a point in Lazarus walking out in his wrapping still, because.
well, yeah, that's clear here in this account.
Because they unbind him, they're sitting
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's clear here in this account, but with Jesus, it's not so clear. Excuse me. Okay. So, let's back up to where Mary now came at Jesus. He summoned her, and we're only told a little of what she said, but it's very similar. But we do see an outpouring of deep emotional grief. Mary wept, the friends with her wept, and Jesus wept. Well, why did he weep, knowing the future as he did? I don't know that. Well, he did know that he was going to heal. He did know that, because that he had been permitted by God. He had ample reason for grief, though, even though in the future he still felt all those emotions. He knew of his own suffering coming soon, but he did not grieve for himself. He knew that Lazarus' place in heaven was better than on earth. Yeah, see, this is an interesting story, and we're not, use the word story, I mean true historical account in this case. But there was a comedian that was talking about this whole thing from Lazarus' perspective. And we talk about this, that if we understand our, the words escaping me, eschatology, personal eschatology properly, that Lazarus' soul was residing in paradise and getting to experience all the glories of whatever that's like. You know, that's good. And the way the comedian portrayed it was like he said he went to Lazarus' house there, or wherever he was. He said, knocked on the door and was like, look, we've not done this very often, but we're going to have to send you back. And so, you can imagine, I just wonder what he was able to communicate after all this about what it was like in the intermediate state. If he was permitted to speak about that. You know, guys, you're not going to believe, I mean, this is amazing, where I'm going, and we want to, Moses was there, Abraham was there, yeah. Well, we know that's what Samuel said. He wasn't happy in what happened there. So, but anyhow, so
I just have a thought. The rich man had asked that Lazarus would help his brothers so that they wouldn't end up where he was at.
correct.
So I think he was able to do that.
Well, this is a different Lazarus.
I don't know. Well, that may be true, but I don't necessarily think that's true.
The rich man and Lazarus parable,
I mean,
quite sure that Lazarus,
it's the only parable that that uses the name of a person.
sir, it's not, because it's not a parable.
Right.
You know, so that distinguishes it from a parable. It's an actual, it's not a parable. This is Jesus teaching on the nature of things as they really are, I believe. So that's something that we could look into. Maybe a little homework for you is rich man and Lazarus here. So if you wanted to look at that and provide some evidence, that would be good to think about. Now, so Jesus, well, let me back up. So we talk about his grief. The grief that started his tears at this moment was an intense grief of those about him. When they saw Jesus weeping, they said, see how he loved him. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So the time had come for another great demonstration of what Jesus could do. So Jesus asked at this point where the body was, and they took him to the tomb. And again, this was no easy moment for Jesus. Once again, he was deeply moved. He ordered the stone taken from the entrance of the cave-like tomb, and practical Martha quickly objected that the odor of decomposition would fill the air, and surely it would. But Jesus promised that if she believed, she would see the glory of God, and all might see the miracle, but only the believers would see the glory of God. Ooh, that's interesting. Now, this isn't speaking miraculously that if you believe that you would see it. This is speaking of in a metaphorical sense. Because someone could witness something miraculous and still not understand it, or their heart was hardened in such a way that they would not allow themselves to understand it as being the glory of God. And that's what this sentence means here. He said, Father, I thank you. The submission coming through here in the way that he's talking is really evident. With these words, Jesus began a prayer. It was a prayer of thanksgiving before the event, and expressed the purpose that they may believe that you sent me. Well, in the silence that followed his brief prayer to God, Jesus raised his voice and called for Lazarus to come from the tomb. He came out, grave clothes and all. That Lazarus was able to come out because he was with the grave clothes may have been a miracle within a miracle. Jesus, practical as always, ordered that he be released from the tightly wound cloth. Lazarus was free, and his body filled with life. And now we have two different kinds of reactions to this. We have the reaction of faith and fear, and then also there were plots. This miracle was so convincing that many of the Jews who had been in doubt now believed in Jesus. Some of them reported to the Pharisees. Now, could this have been an exciting report like, look, you cannot deny this now. He is the Christ. You need to get on board. Could that be? Sure. Or could it have been, you need to hear this because we're in on like the plot? Could that have been as well? Could have been either one. So some of them did report to the Pharisees, perhaps hoping to convince even those who were the most bitter in opposition it was their intention. If that was their intention, they failed. Because in verse 47, therefore the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council and were saying, what are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. But a certain one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all. Wait, what? What's happening here? You know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation should not perish. Wait, what's he saying here?
He's telling the truth.
What's he saying in his mind at this moment? What's he saying in his mind at this moment?
That Jesus had to die in order to save the nation.
Yes, so he's saying, look, if we don't take this guy out, we're going to lose our nation. Rome's going to come in and wipe us out. But who is he again?
The high priest.
He's Caiaphas the high priest. He was prophesying and he didn't even know it. Because what was he saying? Inadvertently. That Jesus would die and it would save the nation. He's prophesying, he doesn't even know it. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. It's expedient that one man should die for the people and that the whole nation should not perish. Now, this he did not say on his own initiative, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but that he might also gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So this explains what he was saying unintentionally. Because verse 53 clarifies their understanding of his statement. He was saying, we've got to kill him so that we can save our nation, stuff, our position, our place.
Like it is.
Yeah, keep things as is, keep our power. Yeah, go back to verse 48. The Romans will come and take away both our place, our power, and our nation. That's he's saying, we're going to lose everything if we don't kill him. And then Caiaphas says this, but John clarifies and tells us that God was prophesying through him using his own evil words for good here. And that he was going to take the Jews and Gentiles and make them into one children. So from that day on, they planned together to kill him. Jesus, therefore, no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness into a city called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. And we'll stop there. So, the miracle was so convincing that many of the Jews who had been in doubt, they believed. Some reported, and their intentions, if it was for good, it failed. The raising of Lazarus only strengthened the Pharisees and chief priests in their determination to get rid of Jesus. His coming to the area may have taken them by surprise, but as soon as they learned of it, they called an emergency meeting of the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of the Jews. There was but one question on their agenda. It was not a question of whether or not a resurrection miracle had happened. They weren't, what do you think you'd talk about? Hey, what do you think? Isn't this amazing? Let's praise and glorify God for what's happening in and around our city. Nope. That's not what they talked about at all. Yeah, it was a question of how to stop Jesus, whoever he was and whatever he was doing. Now, obviously, Jesus' popularity and his power with the crowds were growing. And the restless people were longing for the promised Messiah, and most of them expected him to lead them in winning freedom from the Romans who ruled over them. If Jesus would plainly and publicly announce that he was the Messiah, armed rebellion might start whether he wanted to or not. The ruling Jews reasoned that the Romans would come to punish the whole nation if disturbances continued and rebellion arose. And if you understand anything about the intertestamental period, the time after the return from Babylon, where they established the temple and built the wall and all, and then as time went on and Alexander the Great and the Romans came into power, the Jews rose up a number of times and had many rebellions, bloody rebellions. So they had a history. And so the Romans surely were aware of so they were aware of their history and what might happen, and saying that if we don't do something here, then we might go through this all over again, and we know how it's going to end because Rome was way more powerful. And certainly they weren't putting their trust in God at this moment. This was not like getting in the 300. There wasn't nothing like this happening here. This was all their own conniving.
They're all very worried about their own importance.
Oh, certainly. I think that's absolutely clear in this scripture. Yep, their place in their nation. And I think it was their place more than anything. So, such a rebellion, they were sure, would be crushed, and they, the Jews who were in power at the time, would be removed from office because they had not been able to maintain order. It was better, they reasoned, that one should die, the high priest, than that the whole nation perish. His words were more truly a prediction of what was going to happen than he realized, as John informs us. He did not say this on his own. God spoke through Caiaphas, even though the high priest did not know it. Jesus would indeed die for the Jewish nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. This would include Gentiles as well as Jews. In John 11:53, so from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Now in verses 54 through 57, it tells us that it was not time for Jesus to give his life, so he again left Jerusalem, and once again the plots of the Jewish leaders were frustrated, but as the Passover approached, this is the Passover. This is the Passover that we associate with the institution of the Lord's Supper and the Passion and all that stuff that's about to occur. That's what is right around the corner here. So as the Passover approached, the people gathering in Jerusalem were expecting him to return. The chief priests and the Pharisees gave orders for his arrest, but still the people looked for him. He had brought life to the physical body of Lazarus. Lazarus, who could deny that he could bring life to the eternal spirits of God's people? All righty.